I'm just going to do a higher level conversation with you guys rather than talk specific grains. It's a very broad audience. Throw you some challenges, what we need to think about as Australian growers in this context, and also just a little bit about GRDC and a few innovation investments that we're looking at doing to try and change the paradigm. But firstly, I've got a little task. What does 40 mean to you guys? Probably nothing. But we're going to have a roving mic around the floor for a couple of minutes, so you all need to start thinking, because we're going to just pick people. So, for example, 40 to me, it's taken me at least 40 goes to stand up on a single ski when I'm skiing. This was years ago, of course. It might have taken you 40 opportunities to finally win a grand final if you can play at 60. But is there something in your life, whether it's your family or a hobby or your work or a passion of yours, that comes to mind when you think about 40? I actually just turned 40. And if you believe that, you're pretty much gullible 40 times over. So, for instance, WD-40, what's that stand for? Water dispersant formulation number 40. It's not WD-17. It actually took them 40 cracks to actually get that product on the shelf. So I've got Andrew, the captain of this Nuffield ship, and I've said I'm going to get him to run the mic for a couple of seconds. So just think of something that relates to 40 to you guys. Andrew, have you got a 40?
Yeah, I suppose we talked earlier about, the average farmer has 40 seasons in his career, and I have a saying that I don't like to make the same mistake twice. So I reckon I've got a few more years left to work out on our farm the drainage and the landscape and getting that to be sustainable, so we're not causing erosion problems and the waterlogging and all that goes with having too much water at times.
Righto, who else? Come on.
Oh, I was going to say 40 carvings, but you already got to there. So 40's young.
40's young. I love it. Excellent. Do you know on a Monopoly board, there's 40 squares around the edge of a Monopoly board, which is regarded as the game of life?
Yeah, I think 40's ideally how long I'd be liking to look into the future, whereas currently I think I'm looking at about 5 years as a farmer when we're looking at our planning. I think 40 would be a better number.
Come on, someone else. Did you know 40 below, whether it's 40 degrees Celsius below or 40 degrees Fahrenheit below, is the only time that those temperatures correlate?
I think 40, you'd have to be your midlife crisis, and I learnt that 40 is when blokes work out that they could actually die after 40, so...
Thanks, Brian, that's excellent. Thanks for that. Come on, we'll pick one more.
It took me to 40 to become a Nuffield scholar.
Excellent. And look how rewarding that is. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everyone. Think about your 40. And actually, Andrew picked it up right from the get-go. That is, a grower, on average, only has 40 seasons in their life. When they're actively farming, the average grower only has 40 cracks, 40 years, 40 seasons. This is 40 opportunities to either make a profit or a loss. 40 times to influence the innovation paradigm on your farm. 40 times or opportunities to adapt, to innovate, to implement new innovation technology. You cannot just deliver on the 40th year. We need to be delivering every single year. And that is why it's so critical that organisations like GRDC, but also growers and everyone in the service sector are delivering impact every year and giving us the opportunity to implement and adopt and give us the confidence to actually invest, to actually grow our businesses and to make those changes in our farming systems. 40 opportunities. And of course it's hard when you get a couple of years, particularly in this northern region like we do up here, where you miss 2, 3, some people out at Wild got 4 to 5 years on that run. So that's always a challenge, but only 40 goes. So we'll hop into it, because I know that Jodie's going to crack me off probably early, I suspect. Just some context around, I'm using grain as an example, but this goes right across commodities. So if you look at Australian wheat production, this is actually wheat producers. So we sit at number 9. We're often a number 3 or a number 4 international exporter. So we're quite big. In the wheat game, we're regarded as quite big. We think of ourselves in Australian grains perspective as quite a big player. Then we have a look at soybean. Just have a look at the numbers. Like obviously Australia's down at number 32, but look at our numbers of wheat production, 24, 25 million on the last slide, production. The big two players here, 240 million tonne collectively in soybean, second largest crop in the world. Then we just move to corn internationally. So where are we? We're not big corn producers, maize producers, whatever you want to call it. And that's fine, because wheat is our main game. But if you just look at America, and that's just the United States of America, not North America, including Canada, last year they had a grain production of 530 million tonne. Australians' production on average is somewhere between 38, 45 million tonne, depending on the year. We won't talk about last year because it's about half that. Thank you very much to the Western Australians. But just give you some context, we only grow around 4% of Australia's grain, the world's grain, 4%. In the beef industry, it's 3.2% of world beef production. But we're huge exporters in those particular sectors. So we as Australians actually think we're influential. We have a place in this market around the world. We can position ourselves. We can actually ask for things to come to us. It's actually not right. And if you look at the R&D perspective around the world, and this is thanks to Bayer, so the figures on your right-hand side there are actually Bayer International. But just look at the life science companies alone. We're talking 4 life science companies spend on R&D alone $6 billion. Now, where do they want to play? Do they want to play in Australia where we're producing 3 and 4% of things? Or do they want to play with America, Canada, Europe, the South Americas? That's where they want to play because it's all about market. So we are a very small market. We're quite complex. The adaptation here in Australia is much more complex than anywhere else. That's what I would contend, because we have such a varied climatic situation, soils, etc. So that just gives you some context that we think we're big, we think we're influential, but we're not. We do have currency in the world though, absolutely. So I just want to throw some challenges before I sneak onto some GRDC and things, because it's always my job to give you a bit of a GRDC injection. These are things that we need to think about as Australian growers, organisations, service providers. Doesn't matter who you are, these are the things that we need to think about. We are not regarded as a tier 1 country to the life science companies. So how do we influence that? We need to attract innovation to Australia. We were always in a very good position in the 70s and 80s and early 90s. But now, the others, because of their markets are so big, the opportunity for them to play is so much more diminished here in Australia than it is internationally. They do love early adopters though. Anyone who's bringing innovation to market love early adopters. And that's one of our key planks here in Australia. It doesn't matter what grower you're in or what industry you're in. If we maintain our status as early adopters, people want to always play with us. They want to use us as a test bed. There's a reason why John Deere always bring things out to Australian growers, because we're so damn good at breaking stuff. And that's fantastic for their business, because they trot them out here in Australia very early. We give them a run around, snap a few things, send them back, tell the boys to fix it. They come back the next year, and then it goes to market about 2 years later. So early adopters, we need to maintain that advantage. And Australian growers have always been early adopters. Stay there. And that's why Nuffield, for instance, is so critical. Building that inquiring mind and driving that innovation, implementing it, searching it out, bringing it here, and making sure that we're seen as early adopters and innovators. Partnerships, traditional, non-traditional. Traditional partners like universities, state agencies, CSIRO. That's in our world with GRDC. But we need to be doing more in the non-traditional. So that's the likes of the life science companies. That is this innovation space, the start-up space. And I'll give a couple of examples in a minute. But we need to be stretching ourselves as organisations like GRDC to play in a different paradigm. We can't stay in the same space we've always been. Resources are constrained in state agencies. You've all seen extension drop over the last 20 years. DPIRD, for instance, in WA, which is the Department of Ag, we've gone from 1,500 employees 7 years ago to 850 today. So that's an agricultural department. Meanwhile, your R&D corporations such as MLA and ourselves are just plainly trying to chock the wheels on some of that market failure space. So that's a challenge for us. So that's why non-traditional partners such as life science and some of these other players, we need to be actively seeking their involvement in our businesses and in yours. We need to respect the technology. Stewardship. So if you're bringing a new product to market, you want to know that we're going to use it appropriately so that there's some longevity to that. I'm not going to bring something through the regulatory system here in Australia and then have it spent in 3 years because we've got weed resistance or a fungicide resistance in the grains industry, or a tick resistance in the beef industry, or whatever it might be. We need to be very conscious ourselves implementing the technology to look after it. And that will, again, attract these guys here because we respect their technology. Intellectual property, there was a question last night to David Crombie about this. We do know there's people in the world that don't respect intellectual property. We do. We need to continue to do that because there's a value proposition for people to invest here, because we respect the fact somebody's invested in that, brought it to market, we'll protect it, we will reward you by paying for the product. Value capture mechanisms. We need to be mindful of trying to incentivise people to come here with their products and services. So in the grains industry, we have the endpoint royalty for grains, and some people like it, some people hate it. But what it does do, if you invest in innovation and bring it to market, there's no way you're going to bring it to the Australian market unless you know there's an ability to capture cash flow and profit out of that product or service, so that then you'll just keep working in the Australian market and building that capability and bringing those services and products to the Australian market. And yes, there's a bit of a common theme in 2 or 3 of these. We as growers pay, but that's the world we live in. I'm actually happy to spend $1 if I know I'm going to get 2 or 3 back. That's always the way of the world in economics. But we do need to ensure there's value capture mechanisms there to do that. We need to have some confidence in ourselves around bringing products and services to market and commercialising them here in Australia. And I'll give an example of what GRDC is doing in the future. I know MLA is doing some of the same sort of stuff. We do have some great things here in Australia to do, and we always hear about exporting our technology and innovation, let somebody else commercialise. And that's all because of market size. But I think we need to try and think about how we can capture that early, commercialise it here, and then export it. And there's always this issue about investing in core capability and capacity in the Australian market, whether it be with universities, whether it be in service industry, whether it be with CSIRO. We've got some great scientists here in Australia. We need to continue to grow that, make sure there's succession through those processes. We absolutely need people in this R space, the high-end science research space, and then you translate that down to the D and then the extension piece. But without the R, we're dead, is the bottom line, and that's where core business of GRDC needs to make sure that we've got core capability and capacity, whether it's in pathology or whether it's in weed management or whatever it might be. We need core capability. So there's some challenges for all of us to think about to ensure that we incentivise innovation coming to us. So a quick hit on GRDC. GRDC is it's been the largest RDC for a few years now. We actually had to pull back our spend last year. We're normally around $190 million a year in R&D. Last year we pulled it back because of the drought, a fraction, but we've decided to ramp it back up to $190 million this year if we can find the quality product programs to invest in this year. So that's just because we decreased doesn't mean we actually stopped any research, just that we didn't invest in more new research. So you'll just see the purpose there of GRDC. 3 years ago, we changed the purpose of the organisation. We always used to talk about productivity. GRDC is investing in productivity for Australian grain growers. Well, we've moved it to enduring profitability to Australian grain growers. Your driver is our driver. So that's meant that GRDC looks at things right across the table, inside and outside farm gate. So our appetite has broadened. So if it influences your profit driver, we need to think about trying to either increase it or decrease it. Decrease it if it's a cost, increase it if it's a price or a yield. So there's obviously, it looks a lot of money, but just like someone like an MLA who are always within about $10 or $15 million of us, there's a lot of competitive tension. This is a national industry, 20,000 growers, there's a lot of competitive tension in the portfolio, and there's always a lot of demands on the resources. But we really appreciate the support of our growers with GRDC. So it's pretty simple. Profit equation, pretty simple. Yield time price, less your cost, put a bit of risk in there. So we need to be thinking a bit further down the chain. We're not just about punching yield. it is about cost efficiency. So, spend $1 but get $2 back. So our driver is very much around profit, and this is changing the way that GRDC is literally investing. Now, we have traditional portfolio, things that you would expect as a grain sector. Some of these things are actually what you regard as market failure. Nobody else will invest in them. Growers inherently invest in them because they invest in GRDC to do this on their behalf. And that's where we become their R&D arm. So things like farming systems and nutrition, some of the soils and agronomy work, there's things in there that nobody else will invest in because there's no way that you can get that value capture mechanism I was talking to you about. A service industry won't necessarily invest in that because I can't see a way of actually getting paid for the service. But things like traits research, varieties and other tools that we're investing in, and GRDC's moved more into the extension space in the last 4 or 5 years than it ever has. We've moved 50% of our staff into the regions in the last 3 years. So I'm just going to touch on a few without getting sort of bogged down in all the projects of GRDC. As you saw, there's 360 projects. So if you'd like me to, I could run through them all. That'd be really exciting. But these are just some things that are now currently commercialised on behalf of growers. Growers have invested in this. And then I'm just going to go to a couple of others where we're just sort of stretching the paradigm a bit. So gluten-free barley beer. Sounds like a small market maybe. So Radeberger, this has now been commercialised. Radeberger, which is a very large brew house in Germany, have now taken on gluten-free beer. So we've got an ultra-low gluten barley bread. So, as in through the breeding program, not bread. So there's an ultra-low gluten barley, so once you use it, it is actually determined gluten-free. So you mightn't think that's a big market. So when we first invested in this was a niche, and we're talking about 2%, 2.5% of the population are celiacs, actually allergic to gluten. But now in Western Europe, 15% of the population are voluntarily selecting gluten-free. Does that resonate by any chance here in Australia? Gluten-free everything, on page. So what was seen as a niche 10 years ago when we first invested in this, when it's just been commercialised in the last little while, there's an opportunity now for our growers to capture that value moving forward. Omega-3 canola, it is just going through commercialisation with new seed now and hopefully coming to Australian shores in the next couple of years for growers to participate. It's a GM canola, but the oil has omega-3 content. Omega-3 is enormous in the world. It's required in a whole range of foodstuffs. Fish industry require it, use it and are exploited by it. So omega-3 is a very large and potentially a premium market. And Australian grain growers own this technology jointly with CSIRO. So it was their investment that's brought this to the market. So we think that's an exciting opportunity. And hopefully in the next couple of years we'll see cultivars coming through for that opportunity. And just to give you a bit of a sense of a lot of talk around glyphosate, this is only just a very small, we do a lot in weed management. It's actually one of our largest crop protection pieces in our portfolio. There is literally tens of millions of dollars spent out of GRDC around weed management and a holistic view. We're not just talking about herbicides, we're talking about the whole integrated approach. But a couple of things, the Herbicide Innovation Partnership with Bayer, that's been now going for 4.5 years. So that costs GRDC $9 million a year. That's a lot of money. But what we do is we partner with the best. Bayer are the lead in herbicide discovery in the world. We have 11 Australian postdoc people, they're not students, they're people who have finished their doctorates, biologists and chemists working in Frankfurt on our growers' behalf. So they go around for a 2-year stint, they get embedded in the Bayer business, and they're in the labs doing herbicide discovery, identifying herbicides for our problem weeds, things that we've got resistance for in Australia. So that's ensuring that we've got that coming through. And $9 million is a lot of money, but we're leveraging $9 million to a $100 and something million program and leveraging it entirely in the interest of Australian grain growers, because all our problem weeds are on the earliest assay tests in Frankfurt. So we've got feather-top rhodes, we've got your radish, we've got the fleabanes, we've got the ryegrass, we've got the oats, we've got all those things sitting over in Frankfurt. They actually breed our weeds up, which is great over there, and then they try to kill them. So that is a very strong partnership, and we're really looking forward to some good outcomes in that. Harrington weed seed destructor, it's been commercialised in headers now, and yes, there's a competitor out there now. That's great. If an innovation has been invested in and brought something to market, and then a competitor comes to market 3 or 4 years' time, well, without the initial investment, there never would have been a competitor. So we're really pleased that this is really taken off. Microwave technology, just starting to go through commercialisation. Melbourne University have been doing that with us for some years. The issue around microwave is that the power requirement is so big. So we're trying to work out bespoke ways to ensure there's no doubt microwave does kill weeds, and it'll actually go down, depending on the strength, into the profile to kill weed seeds. And there are opportunities, if we can get that power requirement down, to have a really bespoke way of having a chemical-free way of killing weeds. And we've got the stealth plough. It's just going through a process of looking for commercial opportunities now, which is effectively using the spray weed it technology that you would know, and adapting that to effectively a plough. So pulls back the tine, and if it sees the weed, it'll just chip it out. But you can do it at about 12 or 13 kilometres an hour, and you can retrofit potentially to an existing plough, so that you're not actually reinvesting in more gear. And it's very hard to get weed resistance when you actually dig the damn thing out, I can tell you. Most weeds will not survive if you actually pull it out. So there's a few things that we're trying to do that are just trying to think outside the square and get away from some of the chemistry that we're always using. It's always going to be a part of our lives, but we need to make sure that we're covering all bases. So just a couple of quick ones. This is where we're trying to push the paradigm a little bit. So we're trying to reach, and this is all about incentivising others. The competitive advantage of the Australian grower, doesn't matter what grower you are, our competitive advantage has always been getting the innovation in Australia on our farms at least amongst the first. I would always like to think the first, but at least amongst the first. And we need to make sure we position ourselves there, because whilst it comes back to this same thing, if we let technology go elsewhere, we lose our competitive advantage. So we need to make sure we incentivise and explore and do everything we can to make them play with us. So GRDC and a number of the RDCs are playing in this growers as innovators space. So we know that there's a Harrington seed destructor, for instance. A grower came up with that in Australia, and it's now going international. So there's opportunities, some great innovations have come off farm, where we need to actually incentivise that process, inform growers as to, if you've got a really great idea, something that you think you can actually bring to market, well, let's talk. Let's tell you how to participate in this incubator and accelerator space. So we're now running workshops out there right now to let people know what they can do to try and do that, and then give them a pathway forward. So we're playing in that space. Grain Innovate. So we launched this in February. So this is a $50 million fund, $10 million each year for the next 5 years. So GRDC is putting in $5 million, and then a joint venture capital organisation are putting in the other 5, which sounds a bit unusual. So we've got a JV with a venture capital firm, and they're putting in 5. So what do they want out of it? Well, they want a return of probably somewhere between 12 and 15% on their investment. GRDC's investment in this, we're not looking for the money. We'll clip the ticket if we can on the way through, but our driver is all about incentivising and getting that technology to you as fast as possible. They are not incompatible. So a driver for cash and a driver for innovation first, it can actually work. Both of us have a right of veto in this program on anything that comes through this. We're already funding investments through this in the last 3 or 4 months, and this is a real opportunity. The other thing is that anything that comes through there that the venture capitalist looks at and goes, no way can I see a value proposition, we're not going to get it 12 or 13%. GRDC, we're in the same room making the same assessment, we go, that could be something we need to think about just in our portfolio. It might be a bit market failure, it might only be a 2 or 3% return, or it might be just plainly market failure and we need to invest in it. So we can still, so everything that goes through there, we have full oversight, and we can either be in or out, or we can actually take it with us anyway. So there's a real opportunity here, and it's really attracted international and domestic players in this incubator space. How do you get something to market? This is how you commercialise. So this is trying to put together the package. We need to do the traditional investments, the long-term 1% increase type things in our farming systems, but we also need to stretch down and see if we can get to those 10 to 15% step changes in our system. And GRDC as an organisation need to actually incentivise that. We need to position ourselves to be good to do business with, reach out and just think outside the box and pull every lever on behalf of our growers to incentivise innovation to come to us and get it in the growers' hands. So just a quickie to wrap up. GRDC's actually invested in over 60 nuffields over the time. We are very big and bullish about our investment around leadership, capacity and capability in the grain sector. There is only one downside, that GRDC is now afflicted with nuffield people right through the organisation. We've got them in our RCSN network, we've got them on our panels, we've got them in our staff, and they're even on our board. So it is fantastic, but it just shows you the strength of this program. It actually gives back. It is about partly individual, but it's about empowering that individual to participate and play. And we really appreciate the program. It's done a lot of good for our business, and we just love the fact that you can, at every level in GRDC, we've got nuffields and you know, great performance. So we really appreciate the work you guys do, and we'll be back next year. Well, you won't have me back as a speaker because I go over time, but doesn't matter who you are, do not stand still. Whether you're an organisation or a grower or a university, you need to just keep evolving, keep innovating. Otherwise you're going backwards. Thanks.